And welcome. You're looking live inside the U.S. Capitol as President Biden is just moments away from his first State of the Union address, and our live coverage starts right now.
This is a CBS News special report. President Biden's State of the Union address and the Republican response.
Good evening. I'm Norah O'Donnell in the nation's capital, and President Biden is about to deliver his first State of the Union at a critical time in the country and around the world. You can see these live pictures from inside the House chamber, and you may notice there is a sea of blue and yellow that is in solidarity with Ukraine after Russia continues to bombard the country. There you see, of course, the Chief Justice, John Roberts of the United States, as well as some of the other justices will be there tonight. Of course, the challenge for the president dealing with the rising inflation here at home, the third year of the pandemic. These are some of the biggest challenges of the Biden administration, and we are told he will address them. And of course, he will also use this occasion to push his pick for the Supreme Court, the federal appeals court judge, for the Supreme Court, I should say, the Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, because if she is confirmed, she would become the first black woman on the nation's highest court. Let's bring in CBS Morning's co-anchor, Gayle King. Gayle, I know you've been speaking to voters. What do people want to hear from the president?
Yeah, I'm so fascinated with looking at the chamber for just a second, Nora, to see people engaging without a mask. That's a little jarring to me. We all have to get used to that, I think. But in talking to voters, we talked to several voters in different places all around the country. Believe it or not, the one thing that came up time and time again, they just want the president to give it to us straight. They don't want talking points. They just want to hear the truth. And they use the U word. We want unity. People are so sick of the bickering and the bipartisanship, and they would like to figure out a way that we could come together. And Ukraine was on the top of many people's list. You know, 2 weeks ago, people in this country were not talking about Ukraine. I dare say a lot of people didn't even know where Ukraine is on the map. But now they know, and you've seen the pictures, and the pictures are haunting, and they want to hear, what are we going to do?
Nancy Cordes is our chief White House correspondent, and that is something new. The President of the United States is going to spend the first part of this speech talking about a foreign policy crisis.
Right, Gail. All those voters are going to get what they're looking for. The first 10 minutes of the speech, I'm told, will be all about Ukraine. The president is going to lay out a contrast between democracy and autocracy. He's going to lay out the specifics of the conflict so far, what the U.S. has done to help Ukraine, and he's going to walk through how we got here, how the U.S. brought other Western allies together. They are now all on the same page. He's going to use that word that you say so many voters want, Gail, unity.
Margaret Brennan is our anchor of Face the Nation and our chief foreign affairs correspondent. And Margaret, many of these lawmakers have been getting briefings from the Pentagon, from the intelligence agencies, and they've been told this is a war that could rage 10 to 20 years in Ukraine.
It could. 10 to 20 years is the projections that have been given by military leaders, but that would be ultimately a war that Russia would lose. In the near term, though, it's the Ukrainian civilians who are losing. They are the ones in bunkers right now, and they are the ones who are going to be suffering, particularly in the next 4 to 6 weeks, as that onslaught to capture some of Ukraine's largest cities continues. And we know the Russian military has been frustrated by the lack of progress, low morale, running short on gas, running short on food, because they thought it would be an easier fight. But while that is good news, as our David Martin has reported for, in terms of the Ukrainian military, it's not for civilians. We have heard complaints about civilian casualties and really trying to break the resistance. Vladimir Putin has been known to do this. He's done this to many presidents, whether it was in Syria or whether it was his first foray into Ukraine back in 2014. So this is a long conflict. President Biden knows it well because he was in office with the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014.
Looking at the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, as well as the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, seeing two women there that will flank the President of the United States. Quickly, Nancy, you broke some news just a short time ago.
That's right. In this speech, the president is going to announce that he is closing U.S. airspace to Russian aviation. This is a step that European allies took several days ago. The U.S. is now following suit.
We're also joined by John Dickerson. And John, the president has to confront some big issues, not only what's happening in Ukraine, but inflation.
That's right. We're talking about breaking news, last-minute edits to the speech. It reminds us that the presidency is a job of surprises. Tonight, the president will speak in the tradition started by Woodrow Wilson in 1913 to speak to the Congress. In that speech, Wilson said, "We are in an era of settled peace." 6 months later, he had the First World War. Jimmy Carter in 1980 in his State of the Union. And here we have an interruption.
Let's listen now to the president.
The President of the United States.
And that is the introduction of the president by the House Sergeant at Arms, Major General William Walker. And even for the President of the United States in these past years, it is unusual to see him without a mask in such close proximity to so many people. Also want to bring in our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa, who is on Capitol Hill. And Robert, how did the president prepare? What did his advisors say he wants to do with this speech?
I've been talking to the president's advisors all day, and they say this kind of moment is the full Biden, the Biden they've wanted to show for the last 2 years, but haven't been able to because of the pandemic. The person who has a tactile ability with people, whether they're in Congress or out in the country. And the mission here, they say tonight, is to settle people, not only abroad, but at home, that he feels the pain of voters out there on inflation, on the economy, about their frustrations with the pandemic. This is about pivoting toward the midterms when it comes to politics.
Robert Costa, thank you. And we just saw the president. The other woman there is Karen Gibson. She is the Senate Sergeant of Arms, introducing and essentially escorting the president as he greets the Chief Justice, as well as other members of the Supreme Court. The State of the Union, one of the rare chances that the president has to address the entire nation for a sustained period, and the Republicans also have a response tonight from Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds.
This speech feels different to me tonight because I believe so many people, when I was coming here from New York, just randomly talking to people in the airport, people said, "I never watch a State of the Union. I'm going to watch tonight," because there is so much concern about what's happening in Ukraine and in this country.
State of the world.
Yes, is watching.
And let's bring in our Ed O'Keefe, who's at the White House as we watch the president. Ed, what are you learning about what we'll hear from the president?
Nora, a big focus, of course, as you said, on Ukraine. The first few minutes expected to focus on that. He'll call out Vladimir Putin, saying his war in Ukraine was premeditated and unprovoked.
I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
We pause there for the speaker. He will also discuss inflation, obviously a big concern for most Americans as inflation continues to rise. But the real observation I think we all have is he's getting to shake hands and slap backs, something he didn't get to do last year. As aides have described it, we should see what they hope for, at least, the full Biden tonight.
And let's listen in now to hear the applause there in the House chamber.
Thank you, General.
There are some members sitting in the gallery, but you can see just limited social distancing tonight.
70% of the country now in an area of low transmission, according to the CDC.
Thank you so much.
It's hard to think, and there probably isn't another president who's given the speech who's been in the audience so many times.
Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, members of Congress and the Cabinet, Justice of the Supreme Court, my fellow Americans. Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, we meet as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, but most importantly, as Americans, with the duty to one another, to America, to the American people, and to the Constitution, and an unwavering resolve that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. Thank you. 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. And President Zelensky, to every Ukrainian, their fearlessness, their courage, their determination literally inspires the world. Groups of citizens blocking tanks with their bodies, everyone from students to retirees to teachers, turned soldiers defending their homeland. And in this struggle, President Zelensky said in his speech to the European Parliament, "Light will win over darkness." The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's bright, she's strong, and she's resolved. Yes, we, the United States of America, stand with the Ukrainian people. Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying our European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how he would try to falsify and justify his aggression. We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable, along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others. Even Switzerland are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks in the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. To technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who bilked billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it. The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. We're giving more than $1 billion of direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid the Ukrainian people as they defend their country and help ease their suffering. But let me be clear, our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries, including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. And we're clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos, but while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run. And a pound of Ukrainian people, the proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have. They've known 30 years of independence, have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world. And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers. Tonight, I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. America will lead that effort, releasing 30 million barrels of our own strategic petroleum reserve. And we stand ready to do more if necessary, united with our allies. These steps will help blunt gas prices here at home, but I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. While it shouldn't have taken something so terrible for people around the world to see what's at stake, now everyone sees it clearly. We see the unity among leaders of nations, a more unified Europe, a more unified West. We see unity among the people who are gathering in cities and large crowds around the world, even in Russia, to demonstrate their support for the people of Ukraine. In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment. and the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security. This is the real test, and it's going to take time. So let us continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world. We meet tonight in an America that has lived through two of the hardest years this nation has ever faced. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. I understand, like many of you did. My dad had to leave his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania to find work. So like many of you, I grew up in a family when the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the family. It had an impact. That's when one of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. Because people were hurting, we needed to act, and we did. Few pieces of legislation have done more at a critical moment in our history to lift us out of a crisis. It fueled our efforts to vaccinate the nation and combat COVID-19, delivered immediate economic relief to tens of millions of Americans. It helped put food on the table. Remember those long lines of cars waiting for hours just to get a box of food put in their trunk. It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks, and it worked. It worked. It worked. We created jobs, lots of jobs. In fact, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year. More jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States of America. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years. And the first step in bringing fundamental change to our economy that hasn't worked for working people in this nation for too long. For the past 40 years, we were told that tax break for those at the top and benefits would trickle down and everyone would benefit. But that trickle-down theory led to a weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits, and a widening gap between the top and everyone else in nearly a century. Look, Vice President Harris and I ran for office, and I realize we have fundamental disagreements on this, but ran for office with a new economic vision for America. Invest in America, educate Americans, grow the workforce, build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, because we know when the middle class grows, the poor have a way up and the wealthy do very well. America used to have the best roads, bridges, and airports on earth, and now our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. We won't be able to compete for the jobs of the 21st century if we don't fix it. That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends who joined to invest and rebuild America, the single biggest investment in history. It was a bipartisan effort, and I want to thank the members of both parties who worked to make it happen. We're done talking about infrastructure weeks. We're now talking about an infrastructure decade. And look, It's going to transform America, to put us on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world, particularly China. I've told Xi Jinping it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. We'll create good jobs for millions of Americans, modernizing roads, airports, ports, waterways, all across America. And we'll do it to withstand the devastating effects of climate change and promote environmental justice. We'll build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Begin to replace the poisonous lead pipes so every child, every American has clean water to drink at home and at school. We're going to provide affordable, high-speed internet for every American, rural, suburban, urban, and tribal communities. 4,000 projects have already been announced. Many of you have announced them in your districts. And tonight, I'm announcing that this year, we will start fixing over 65,000 miles of highway and 1,500 bridges in disrepair. And folks, when we use taxpayers' dollars to rebuild America, we're going to do it by buying America. Buy American products. Support American jobs. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year to keep this country safe and secure. There's been a law on the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration, Democrat and Republican, says they'll do it, but we're actually doing it. We'll buy America to make sure everything from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the steel on highway guardrails is made in America from beginning to end. All of it. All of it. But folks, to compete for the jobs of the future, we also need a level playing field with China and other competitors. That's why it's so important to pass the Bipartisan Innovation Act sitting in Congress that will make record investments in emerging technologies and American manufacturing. We used to invest almost 2% of our GDP in research and development. We don't now. China is. Let me give you one example why it's so important to pass. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closely, you'll see a field of dreams, the ground on which America's future will be built. That's where Intel, the American company that helped build Silicon Valley, is going to build a $20 billion semiconductor megasite, up to 8 state-of-the-art factories in one place, 10,000 new jobs. And in those factories, the average job about $135,000 a year. Some of the most sophisticated manufacturing in the world to make computer chips the size of a fingertip that power the world in everyday lives, from smartphones, technology to the internet, technology that's yet to be invented. But that's just the beginning. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who was here tonight. I don't know where Pat is. Pat, there you go. Pat, stand up. Pat came to see me, and he told me they're ready to increase their investment from $20 billion to $100 billion. That would be the biggest investment in manufacturing in American history. And all they're waiting for is for you to pass this bill. So let's not wait any longer. Send it to my desk. I'll sign it. And we'll really take off in a big way. And folks, Intel is not alone. There's something happening in America. Just look around and you'll see an amazing story. The rebirth of pride that comes from stamping products made in America, the revitalization of American manufacturing. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. All told, 369,000 new manufacturing jobs were created in America last year alone. Folks, powered by people I've met like JoJo Burgess from generations of union steelworkers in Pittsburgh, who's here tonight. Where are you, JoJo? There you go. Thanks, buddy. As Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says, it's time to bury the label Rust Belt. It's time to see what used to be called the Rust Belt become the home of a significant resurgence of manufacturing. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages, too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than almost anyone predicted, but the pandemic meant that businesses had a hard time hiring enough people because of the pandemic to keep up production in their factories. So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed. The panic also disrupted the global supply chain. Factories close. When that happens, it takes longer to make goods and get them to the warehouses, to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars last year. 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went way up, especially used vehicles as well. And so we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages. And folks, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. Look, economists call this increasing the productive capacity of our economy. I call it building a better America. My plan to fight inflation will lower your costs and lower the deficit. 17 Nobel laureates in economics said my plan will ease long-term inflationary pressures. Top business leaders, and I believe most Americans, support the plan. And here's the plan. First, cut the cost of prescription drugs. We pay more for the same drug produced by the same company in America than any other country in the world. Just look at insulin. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. In Virginia, I met a 13-year-old boy, the handsome young man standing up there, Joshua Davis. He and his dad both have type 1 diabetes, which means they need insulin every single day. Insulin costs about $10 a vial to make. That's what it costs the pharmaceutical company. But drug companies charge families like Joshua and his dad up to 30 times that amount. I spoke with Joshua's mom. Imagine what it's like to look at your child who needs insulin to stay healthy and have no idea how in God's name you're going to be able to pay for it. What it does to your family, but what it does to your dignity, your ability to look your child in the eye, to be the parent you expect yourself to be. I really mean to think about that. That's what I think about. You know, yesterday, Joshua's here tonight, but yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, buddy, by the way. For Joshua and 200,000 other young people with type 1 diabetes, let's cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month so everyone can afford it. And drug companies will do very, very well, their profit margin. While we're at it, I know we have great disagreements on this floor with this. Let's let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. They already set the price for VA drugs. Look, the American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families with Affordable Care Act plans to save them $2,400 a year on their health premiums. Let's close the coverage gap and make these savings permanent. And second, let's cut energy costs for families, an average of $500 a year by combating climate change. Let's provide an investment tax credits to weatherize your home and your business, to be energy efficient and get a tax credit for it. Double America's clean energy production in solar, wind, and so much more. Lower the price of electric vehicles, saving another $80 a month that you're not going to have to pay at the pump. Folks, the third thing we can do to change the standard of living for hardworking folks is cut the cost of childcare. Cut the cost of childcare. Folks, if you live in a major city in America, you pay up to $14,000 a year for childcare per child. I was a single dad for 5 years, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of help, though. I had a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister that really helped. But middle class and working folks shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income to care for the young children. My plan would cut the cost of child care in half for most families and help parents, including millions of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they couldn't afford child care, to be able to get back to work, generating economic growth. But my plan doesn't stop there. It also includes home and long-term care, more affordable housing, pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. All these will lower costs to families. And under my plan, nobody, let me say this again, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny. I may be wrong, but my guess is if we took a secret ballot in this floor, that we'd all agree that the present tax system ain't fair. We have to fix it. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but let's make corporations and wealthy Americans start paying their fair share. Look, last year, and like Chris Coons and Tom Carper and my distinguished Congresswoman, we come from the land of corporate America. There are more corporations incorporated in America than every other state in America combined. And I still won 36 years in a row. The point is, even they understand they should pay just a fair share. Last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 companies earned $40 billion in profit and paid 0 in federal taxes. Now look, It's not fair. That's why I proposed a 15% minimum tax rate for corporations. And that's why in the G7 and other meetings overseas, we're able to put together, I was able to be somewhat helpful, 130 countries agree on a global minimum tax rate. So companies can't get out of paying their taxes at home by shipping jobs and factories overseas. It'll raise billions of dollars. That's why I propose closing loopholes for the very wealthy who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher and a firefighter. So that's my plan, but we'll go in more detail later. We will grow the economy, lower the cost of families. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this done. We all know we've got to make changes. Folks, and while you're at it, confirm my nominees for the Federal Reserve, which plays a critical role in fighting inflation. My plan will not only lower costs and give families a fair shot, it will lower the deficit. The previous administration not only ballooned the deficit with those tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, it undermined the watchdogs, the job of those to keep pandemic relief funds being wasted. Remember we had those debates about whether or not those watchdogs should be able to see every day how much money was being spent, where was it going to the right place? But in my administration, the watchdogs are back. And we're going to go after the criminals who stole billions of relief money meant for small business and millions of Americans. And tonight, I'm announcing that the Justice Department will soon name a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. And look, I think we all agree, thank you. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half of what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. Lowering your cost also meant demanding more competition. I'm a capitalist, but capitalism without competition is not capitalism. Capitalism without competition is exploitation. It drives up profits. And corporations have to compete. Their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. And folks, and as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch. Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure loved ones get the care they deserve and that they inspect and they will look at closely. We're also going to cut costs to keep the economy going strong and giving workers a fair shot, provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on skills, not just their degrees. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act and paid leave. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and extend the child tax credit so no one has to raise a family in poverty. Let's increase Pell Grants, increase our historic support for HBCUs, and invest in what Jill, our First Lady who teaches full-time, calls America's best-kept secret, community colleges. Look, let's pass the PRO Act. When a majority of workers want to form a union, they shouldn't be able to be stopped. When we invest in our workers and we build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out together, we can do something we haven't done in a long time. Build a better America. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. That doesn't even count the close to 1 million people who sit at a dining room table or a kitchen table and look at an empty chair because they lost somebody. But I also know this, because of the progress we've made, because of your resilience and the tools that we have been provided by this Congress, tonight I can say we're moving forward safely back to more normal routines. We've reached a new moment in the fight against COVID-19, where severe cases are down to a level not seen since July of last year. Just a few days ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a new mask guidelines. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free. And based on projections, more of the country will reach a point across the next couple of weeks. And thanks to the progress we've made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives. I know some are talking about living with COVID-19, but tonight I say that we never will just accept living with COVID-19. We'll continue to combat the virus as we do other diseases. And because this virus mutates and spreads, we have to stay on guard. And here are 4 common sense steps as we move forward safely, in my view. First, stay protected with vaccines and treatments. We know how incredibly effective vaccines are. If you're vaccinated and boosted, you have the highest degree of protection. And we'll never give up on vaccinating more Americans. Now, I know parents with kids under 5 are eager to see their vaccines authorized for their children. Scientists are working hard to get that done. We'll be ready with plenty of vaccines if and when they do. We're all ready. We are also ready with antiviral treatments. If you get COVID-19, the Pfizer pill reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. I've ordered more pills than anyone in the world has. Pfizer is working overtime to get us 1 million pills this month and more than double that next month. And now we're launching the Test to Treat initiative, so people can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost. And folks, if you're immunocompromised or have some other vulnerability, we have treatments and free high-quality masks. We're leaving no one behind or ignoring anyone's needs as we move forward. On testing, we've made hundreds of millions of tests available, and you can order them for free to your doorstep. And we've already ordered free tests. If you already ordered free tests tonight, I'm announcing you can order another group of tests. Go to covidtest.gov starting next week, and you can get more tests. Second, we must prepare for new variants. Over the past, we've gotten much better at detecting new variants. If necessary, we'll be able to develop new vaccines within 100 days instead of maybe months or years. And if Congress provides the funds we need, we'll have new stockpiles of tests, masks, pills ready if needed. I can't promise a new variant won't come, but I can promise you we'll do everything within our power to be ready if it does. Third, we can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. We achieved this because we provided free vaccines, treatments, tests, and masks. Of course, continuing this costs money, so I'll not surprise you. I'll be back to see you all. And I'm going to soon send a request to Congress. The vast majority of Americans have used these tools and may want again. We may need them again, so I expect Congress, and I hope you'll pass that quickly. Fourth, we'll continue vaccinating the world. We've sent 475 million vaccine doses to 112 countries, more than any nation on earth. We won't stop because you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. The vaccine can stop the spread of these diseases. You know, we've lost so much in COVID-19, time with one another. The worst of all, the loss of life. Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies and start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. Look, we can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. I recently visited the New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Moore was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them that we were forever in debt for their sacrifices and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety of every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works. Investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers. That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities. I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I ask Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence. Pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines that hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. The most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and have it counted. And look, it's under assault. In state after state, new laws have been passed. Not only to suppress the vote, we've been there before, but to subvert the entire election. We can't let this happen. Tonight I call on the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, pass the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. And while you're at it, pass the Disclose Act so Americans know who's funding our election. Look, tonight, I like to honor someone who dedicated his life to serve this country. Justice Breyer, an Army veteran, constitutional scholar, retiring Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, thank you for your service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Get up, stand, let them see you. Thank you. And we all know, no matter what your ideology, we all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds, who continue in Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence. A former top litigator in private practice, a former federal public defender, from a family of public school educators and police officers. She's a consensus builder. Since she's been nominated, she's received a broad range of support, including the Fraternal Order of Police and former judges supported by Democrats and Republicans. Folks, if we're to advance liberty and justice, we need to secure our border and fix the immigration system. And as you might guess, I think we can do both. At our border, we've installed new technology like cutting-edge scanners to better detect drug smuggling. We've set up joint patrols with Mexico and Guatemala to catch more human traffickers. We're putting in place dedicated immigration judges in a significant larger number so families fleeing persecution and violence can have their cases heard faster, and those who don't legitimately hear can be sent back. We're screening, we're securing commitments and supporting partners in South and Central America to host more refugees and secure their own borders. We can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led a generation of immigrants to this land, my forebears and many of yours. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those with temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Revise our laws so businesses have workers they need and families don't wait decades to reunite. It's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart thing to do. That's why the immigration reform is supported by everyone from labor unions to religious leaders to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let's get it done once and for all. Folks, advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans. And folks, for our LGBTQ plus Americans, let's finally get the Bipartisan Equality Act to my desk. The onslaught of state laws targeting transgender Americans and their families, it's simply wrong. And I said last year, especially to our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential. Folks, as I've just demonstrated, while it often appears we do not agree, and that we do agree on a lot more things than we acknowledge. I signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year, from preventing government shutdowns, to protecting aging Americans from still too common hate crimes, to reforming military justice, and will soon be strengthening the Violence Against Women Act that I first wrote 3 decades ago. It's important. It's important for us to show the nation we can come together and do big things. So tonight I'm offering a unity agenda for the nation. 4 big things we can do together, in my view. First, beat the opioid epidemic. There's so much we can do. Increase funding for prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. Get rid of outdated rules and stop doctors that stop doctors from prescribing treatments. Stop the flow of illicit drugs by working with state and local law enforcement to go after the traffickers. And if you're suffering from addiction, you should know you're not alone. I believe in recovery, and I celebrate the 23 million Americans in recovery. Second, let's take on mental health, especially among our children whose lives and education have been turned upside down. The American Rescue Plan gave schools money to hire teachers and help students make up for lost learning. I urge every parent to make sure your school does just that. They have the money. We can all play a part. Sign up to be a tutor or a mentor. Children were also struggling before the pandemic: bullying, violence, trauma, and the harms of social media. As Frances Haugen, who is here tonight with us, has shown, we must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Folks, thank you. Thank you for the courage you showed. It's time to strengthen privacy protections, ban targeted advertising to children, demand tech companies stop collecting personal data on our children, and let's get all Americans the mental health services they need. More people can turn for help, and full parity between physical and mental health care if we treat it that way in our insurance. Look, the third piece of that agenda is support our veterans. Veterans are the backbone and the spine of this country. They're the best of us. I've always believed that we have a sacred obligation to equip those we send to war and care for those in their family when they come home. My administration is providing assistance in job training, housing, and now helping lower-income veterans get VA care debt-free. And our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers, one being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan over 40 times. These burn pits that incinerate waste, the waste of war, medical and hazardous material, jet fuel, and so much more. And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world. Never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops. But I am committed to find out everything we can, committed to military families like Danielle Robinson from Ohio, the widow of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He was born a soldier, Army National Guard, combat medic in Kosovo and Iraq, stationed near Baghdad, just yards from burn pits the size of football fields. Danielle is here with us tonight. They love going to Ohio State football games. And they love building Legos with their daughter. But cancer from prolonged exposure to burn pits ravaged Heath's lungs and body. Danielle says Heath was a fighter to the very end. He didn't know how to stop fighting, and neither did she. Through her pain, she found purpose to demand that we do better. Tonight, Danielle, we are going to do better. The VA is pioneering new ways of linking toxic exposure to disease, already helping more veterans get benefits. And tonight, I'm announcing we're expanding eligibility to veterans suffering from 9 respiratory cancers. I'm also calling on Congress to pass a law to make sure veterans devastated by toxic exposure in Iraq and Afghanistan finally get the benefits and the comprehensive health care they deserve. And fourth and last, let's end cancer as we know it. This is personal. This is personal to me and to Jill and to Kamala and so many of you. So many of you have lost someone you love. Husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in America, second only to heart disease. Last month, I announced the plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot that President Obama asked me to lead 6 years ago. Our goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years, and I think we can do better than that. Turn cancers from death sentences into treatable diseases. More support for patients and their families. To get there, I call on Congress to fund what I call ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, patterned after DARPA in the Defense Department, projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more to make our forces more safer and be able to wage war with more clarity. ARPA will have a singular purpose: to drive breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's and diabetes, and more. A unity agenda for the nation. We can do these things. It's within our power, and I don't see a partisan edge to any one of those 4 things. My fellow Americans, tonight we've gathered in this sacred space, a citadel of democracy, in this Capitol. Generation after generation of Americans have debated great questions amid great strife and have done great things. We fought for freedom, expanded liberty, debated totalitarianism and terror. We built the strongest, freest, and most prosperous nation the world has ever known. Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test, protect freedom and liberty, expand fairness and opportunity, and we will save democracy. As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity. We're the only nation on earth that has always turned every crisis we've faced into an opportunity. The only nation that can be defined by a single word: possibilities. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time. And we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
The president tonight promising a unity agenda and at the same time heralding the power of democracy, and at many points throughout this speech getting standing bipartisan applause. John Dickerson.
Yes, I mean, there was a good long portion, and it ended, it appeared, on bipartisan applause. Of course, everybody joining in solidarity with the Ukrainians. The masks were gone, but the Ukrainian flags were there, and that will certainly symbolically note this evening. But then the president, after the edits that came from Ukraine, went to what was pretty much a regular old State of the Union stew pot with everything in it. And you see, though he has not shrunk from, though he's tried to retool his Build Back Better, the new economic vision for America. That's what Democrats will be talking about, which is still focused on taxing corporations, and his Build Back Better agenda, which he's retooled as an inflation fighter now. We'll see if that works.
Nancy Cordes, the president, said Putin will pay a price, and he called out the Russian president, by our count, at least 19 times in this speech.
Right. He has the biggest megaphone he's going to have here at the State of the Union, and he wanted to make the case that the U.S. and its allies in the West are united, that they are all staring down Putin, and that the economic sanctions we've seen so far are only the beginning, and that there's a lot more where that came from. When it comes to domestic policy, this was a president who recognizes that this is an election year where new presidents often lose seats. And so he basically, this was him acknowledging that the only things he's probably going to pass this year are things that have major bipartisan support: addressing the opioid epidemic, mental health care, veterans assistance, the cancer moonshot. These are the types of things that are popular with everyone.
He seems to be indicating that we've turned the corner on COVID. He said, listen, we have to be prepared for a new variant. If there is a new variant, we will be ready for that. But he seemed to say, look, we want the schools to open, we want the businesses to open, we want people to go back to work. And I think he's giving us a pass to say, all right, let's move on to the next phase of COVID. Yeah. Let's get back to our normal lives. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
But that is so much about the economy.
Exactly
the
right.
CDC messaging about 70% of the country living in low to medium transmission areas. That is about reopening the restaurants and really trying to get the leisure sector there. The thing that stood out to me on that was his reference to people like me who have kids who don't have access to a vaccine right now, saying it is coming. There will be a lot of supply when the FDA gets to it. That's also because not a lot of parents are vaccinating their children. 3 out of 10 actually are taking that up for those in that 5-year-old and up age range. So that's part of his agenda that they would like to see more progress on.
Yeah, but for people like you, Margaret, he said, I know you're tired, you're frustrated and exhausted, but I know
amen.
this. He heard you, Margaret. He heard you. But because of the resilience, he said there are tools in place to make this better.
And we're going to hear the Republican response coming up, where the topic of kids, masks, vaccines, and schools is all coming up. Let's turn to our panel. Former Republican Texas Congressman Will Hurd and CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Joel Payne. And Joel, you really saw the president trying to strike some middle ground here, and there was a lot of Republican applause.
There was a lot of Republican applause. I'd also say, too, this really felt like a turn-the-page speech. He wanted to turn the page from a lot of the topics that made up 2021, which was not a really successful political year. If you see how it ended for Joe Biden, he wanted to talk about things that he knew was going to get both Democrats and Republicans to stand up. I also think something that jumped out to me was, something that did not get a lot of time in this speech and something that's going to rankle a lot of his progressive base, and it's voting rights. Voting rights was such a major issue that this president was fighting on just 2 or 3 months ago. And the fact that you got essentially 4 lines of a mention there, I think it'll be something that gets noticed probably in those multiple Democratic responses that we're going to be waiting for here in the next couple of minutes. But I think it's going to be something that concerns a lot of Democrats, that the president has decided, I'm going to abandon some of those promises to the base, and I'm going to focus on things that we know are going to play well to the middle. Something else that didn't get a lot of time and attention? January 6th. I was looking back in the copy of the speech. I didn't see it anywhere. If it was an oversight on my part. But I think that also signals the fact that did not pop up to the top of the president's agenda. That signals another turning the page moment.
Well, and maybe not wanting to focus on such divisive issues instead of trying to focus on ones that unite people. Joel Payne, thank you. Let's bring in Congressman Will Hurd. And Congressman, what did you hear tonight?
Well, I think first and foremost, the beginning was important. The Ukrainian people over the next couple of days and weeks are going to see some really dark times. And the president showed the rest of the world that Republicans and Democrats are united in supporting the Ukrainian people. I think citizens in Poland, in Estonia, were especially excited to know that the United States government is going to use the full force of our power to support our NATO allies, and that the transatlantic relationship is very real. I think that was an important part of the beginning of the speech. I also think some of my Democratic friends who are in tough races, who would be considered more moderate, were happy with some elements in the speech. The fact about talking about crime and the need to actually fund the police was something that's important. But I think the public who is concerned about the rising costs of food and fuel, they're going to want to see some action. And when you have all levers of government under your party control, they're going to want to see more than just rhetoric. They're going to want to see some things get done. And if Speaker Pelosi works, there's enough that the president laid out that there are Republicans that are willing to work. If they're serious about working together, they could find some Republicans to work and add to those 80 bipartisan bills the president's already signed.
That's an excellent point, Congressman. The president using that megaphone and the millions who will turn in tonight to try and set the record straight, in his view, that he is not for defunding the police, that he believes in funding the police. And that was a point where Republicans also got on their feet and applauded. Let's bring in congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, who covers all this so closely. Nicole, one thing he did not mention was Build Back Better, which you've heard that phrase covering Congress so many times, because that legislation will no longer exist. And now the president wanting to focus on what he may be able to get passed and calling it the unity agenda. What's the likelihood any of it gets done?
Yeah, I think that's the big question on Capitol Hill right now. And I will say, going into this speech, I asked a senior administration official, will we hear those words, Build Back Better? And what you heard tonight was building a better America. But we also heard a lot of the same ideas that were in that package last year that Democrats spent the better part of a year negotiating. Things like lowering the cost of prescription drugs, lowering the cost of energy, lowering the cost of health care, lowering the cost of child care. These are all things that were part of that package. And a top Senate Democrat told me today that, look, they realize the reality that Build Back Better, they're going to have to pivot from that. And I think that's the message that you were hearing from President Biden tonight. And so, the hope at this point is that maybe they can parcel out some pieces of this legislation over the next couple of months before the midterms, and also add on to it by dealing with these inflationary issues. We already know Democrats have proposed ideas, for instance, like suspending the federal gas tax holiday. They are also, you heard the president talk a lot about price gouging, and that is something Senate Democrats said today they will be focusing on. So we do expect Senate Democrats in particular to roll out a number of new proposals over the next couple of days and weeks to try to tackle inflation, but also to try to preserve parts of the president's agenda.
Nicole Killian with excellent reporting. Nicole, thank you. Want to bring in congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. He's inside the House chamber. And Scott, as you know, much of the president's agenda has been blocked by two Democrats, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema. Tell us about what you saw with them tonight.
I saw Senator Manchin sitting amid the Republicans next to Senator Mitt Romney, near Senator Susan Collins. And when he stood for the Democrats' only applause lines, he was standing on an island by himself. All that being said, this just felt so different than prior years. There were no guests with the members of Congress in the upper levels. In fact, the members of Congress themselves were spread out in the upper levels. So there was less cumulative noise, less cumulative energy and revelry, despite the strong applause lines. It's just a different feel this year, with COVID restrictions still a cloud over this chamber, even though the masks are gone. And one other note, Norah, the panel mentioned this. There were zero references to January 6th in the address tonight, even as the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was sitting near the front, the man overseeing the prosecution of the January 6 rioters, and even as President Biden walked through those doors, that they had furniture blockading January 6, 2021 to keep the violent mob out.
Scott MacFarlane, important to have your perspective from inside the chamber and also all your reporting that's been centered around January 6th. Thank you.
Is that so surprising, though, guys, that he wouldn't mention January 6th? I don't think you can mention January 6th without going into former President Donald Trump territory. And I think that he wants to stick with unity. The rare time that he did say something about Donald Trump, which appeared to be a little disparaging, there seemed to be noticeable boos in the audience.
Yeah.
Does it surprise you that he stayed away from January 6th?
Not given what he needed to do. The president's approval ratings are in the tank.
Yes.
He's facing a midterm election where his party's facing big losses. He needed to go for the middle big time. And I think that's what he was doing tonight.
Yes, and we'll see what gets extruded into the public through the news system, and because who knows what people are going to pick up out of this once it gets through. Mostly we know from State of the Unions it's watched by the president's party, and so we got to see what actually survives. And I'm not sure I heard anything in this speech that immediately goes and changes the conversation. That's a tall order, but I'm not sure I heard it.
And there's a real split within the party about how much time to spend on January 6th. There's one faction that says, look, this was an attack on democracy itself. We have to get to the bottom of who started it, how it happened, so we can prevent it from happening again. But then there's another section of the Democratic Party that says, you know what, we got to be forward-looking. We got to be putting forward a positive agenda if we want to win votes in November. We can't spend that much time focusing on the past.
Let's bring in Ed O'Keefe at the White House. And Ed, I know you spend so much time with Nancy. On that note, I mean, many people in the party, the Democratic Party, want to look forward. They want Congress to do their oversight, but at the same time, put forward proposals that are politically popular with their base.
Yeah, and in speaking with some aides here at the White House, watching this amid the pizza boxes and the empty beer cans, we saw them earlier, they are pleased with the bipartisan response, or the bipartisan reception to this address. One aide texted me, too many bipartisan applause points to stop for. The president plowed right through them. That unity agenda, especially at the end, with a focus on fighting opioid addiction, mental health, veterans, and defeating cancer, those are the kinds of things they really think are just so simple for Washington to somehow sort out, and the kinds of things that affect everyday Americans and families across the country. Will there be any Republican appetite to do it? That remains unclear. One other note, watching this president snake his way out of the House chamber, most of the hands he has shaken are of retiring House Democrats. 31 have announced plans to go, either running for some other office or they're leaving Congress entirely. But many of those that stuck around to shake his hands are the ones that are leaving anyway, or ones that always stand there for whoever the president is. He at one point was having a conversation with Congressman Maloney of New York, who's chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. A pretty spirited conversation, it looked like there. Probably about what is the party going to do to take what he talked about tonight, amplify it, and make sure the Democrats at least don't lose as many seats as they in some ways are forecasted to do. We should point out also the president is set to travel tomorrow to Wisconsin, a key battleground state not only in a midterm year but in a presidential year. He'll be there to talk about his domestic agenda alongside the First Lady. And his Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, will make her first visit to Capitol Hill to meet with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, senior members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and begin her pilgrimage to speak with the 100 senators alongside a Biden administration team that's been meeting with her since last Friday to get her ready for the confirmation fight.
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. And the gregarious Joe Biden is still in the House chamber. I don't ever think I've seen a president spend so much time after a speech in the House chamber. Let's bring in Robert Costa, our chief election campaign correspondent. And I know, Robert, you've been speaking with Republicans. Tell us what you're learning.
Well, Nora, they've been texting me in the last few minutes saying they feel pretty good that Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds is giving this Republican response because they felt unsettled about what happened in the House chamber during President Biden's address. There were interruptions by two House Republicans, Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, both kind of shouted out, interjected during the course of the president's speech. Congresswoman Taylor Greene spoke at a white nationalist conference in Orlando last week. And so now they're hoping that Governor Reynolds from Iowa can turn the corner a little bit as they try to frame the party ahead of the midterm election, an election they feel they're going to do pretty well in. But the party right now internally is divided inside the GOP.
And Robert, that was a very unfortunate, if not ugly, interruption at a moment when the president was just about to mention his son who passed away from brain cancer.
It was, Nora. And earlier today, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy kind of dismissed a question about Congresswoman Taylor Greene attending that white nationalist conference, trying to move on. But by them interrupting tonight, putting themselves front and center, speaking right to the president's face on national TV, they're making themselves issues not only for the Republican Party, but in the whole American political scene. They're not going away, and they made that clear tonight.
Do you think it hurts the Republican Party?
The Republican Party, everyone's competing for the independent voter, men and women in suburban states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. Who is the Republican Party going to have as its face? Is it going to be someone like Governor Reynolds of Iowa, or is it former President Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia? The Republican challenges, they have really strong poll numbers. They feel good about their chances. But the face of the party, who is it going to be? And former President Trump, as I saw over the weekend in Florida, he still wants himself to be the face of the GOP.
Robert, do you think other Republicans will speak out against Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert? Do you think they will say that was not okay and we disagree with that kind of behavior?
Gail, it kind of depends on what you mean by speaking out. So far, we've seen some muted statements, things that have been typed out and emailed to reporters. But who's going to make a full-throated cry about this kind of trend in the Republican Party towards the former president and at times even towards white nationalism? This is something we have to track as reporters, an important story as we move toward the midterm elections.
Yeah, I guess when I say speaking out, I mean out loud so everybody can hear in a public forum.
All right, stand by, because coming up, we are going to hear the Republican response from Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Iowa was the first state in the nation to require that schools open their doors. When we come back. Welcome back to CBS News coverage of President Biden's State of the Union. Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds is going to be delivering the Republican response. She's the 43rd governor of the Hawkeye State, and she is the first woman to hold that office. Nancy Cordes is here with us, and this is the biggest speech that Governor Reynolds has ever given.
Right, and these responses always seem to come off better when they come from someone who, like the president, is in an executive position, a governor in a state, not a lawmaker. And Iowa is a purple state, so that's a bonus. She's viewed as someone who has handled COVID well in her state, and of course, having been more aggressive than many Democrats and even some Republicans when it comes to getting kids back into the classroom.
She's 62 years old. She's a grandmother. Before she got into politics, she was a pharmacist assistant. She's a recovering alcoholic. And as you pointed out, when it comes to schools, many Republicans said she was the model because she opened schools early. Tonight, I think she's going to try and hold that mantle that essentially Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia tried to say. It's parents. They're the ones who should be making these decisions.
Campaigns are about what turf do you control, and tonight is a wrestle over that. And Republicans want the turf to be on education.
And here now, Iowa's governor.
Good evening. I'm Kim Reynolds, governor of the great state of Iowa. Like you, I just watched the president's address. I listened as the governor of our state, as a mom and a grandmother of 11, who's worried our country is on the wrong track. We're now 1 year into his presidency, and instead of moving America forward, it feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time to the late 70s and early 80s, when runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet Army was trying to redraw the world map. Even before taking the oath of office, the president told us that he wanted to, quote, make America respected around the world again, and to unite us here at home. He's failed on both fronts. The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal did more than cost American lives. It betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies. North Korea is testing missiles again at an alarming rate. The Speaker of the House recently warned our Olympic athletes not to speak out against China. And now Russia has launched an unprovoked, full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, an attack on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Now all Americans must stand united in solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine as they courageously defend their country against Putin's tyranny as they fight for their freedom. But we shouldn't ignore what happened in the run-up to Putin's invasion, waiving sanctions on Russian pipelines while eliminating oil production here at home, focusing on political correctness rather than military readiness, reacting to world events instead of driving them. Weakness on the world stage has a cost, and the president's approach to foreign policy has consistently been too little, too late. It's time for America to once again project confidence. It's time to be decisive. It's time to lead. But we can't project strength abroad if we're weak at home. And that's what I want to discuss with you tonight. The president and Democrats in Congress have spent the last year either ignoring the issues facing Americans or making them worse. They were warned that spending trillions would lead to soaring inflation. They were told that their anti-energy policies would send gas prices to new heights, but they plowed ahead anyway, raising the price at the pump by 50% and pushing inflation to a 40-year high. 4 decades ago, when our nation was last reeling from inflation, I was a young working mom just starting out. My husband, Kevin, worked days while I watched our girls, and then we would literally switch. We would pass in the yard as he was coming home, and I was leaving to work evenings at the local grocery store. From across that checkout counter, I saw the pain of inflation on my neighbors' faces. I saw what happens when prices rise faster than wages. The Biden administration believes inflation is a, quote, high-class problem. I can tell you, it's an everybody problem. I saw moms and dads' paychecks buy them less and less. I watched working people choose which essentials to take home and which ones to leave behind. And now President Biden's decisions have a whole new generation feeling that same pain. When I took the oath of office 5 years ago, I promised Iowans that I would never lose sight of who I was working for, that I wouldn't become detached from the problems they were facing, from the problems that I had faced myself. But you don't have to check groceries to see what high inflation does to people. You just need to step outside of the DC bubble. Talk to Americans about what's on their mind. Ask them, what are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And they'll tell you. And I can tell you what's not on that list. They won't tell you that spending trillions more and bankrupting their children is the answer to their problems. They won't tell you that we should be paying people not to work. And they certainly won't tell you that we should give billions in tax giveaways to millionaires and billionaires in Democrat-controlled states like California, New York, and New Jersey. But that's what the Biden administration has been pushing for over the last year. And that's all part of Build Back Better. Thankfully, the president's agenda didn't pass because even members of his own party said enough is enough. Well, the American people share that view. Enough is enough. And it's not just with DC spending. Americans are tired of a political class trying to remake this country into a place where an elite few tell everyone else what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot believe. They're tired of people pretending the way to end racism is by categorizing everybody by their race. They're tired of politicians who tell parents they should sit down, be silent, and let government control their kids' education and future. Frankly, they are tired of the theater, where politicians do one thing when the cameras are rolling and another when they believe you can't see them, where governors and mayors enforce mandates but don't follow them, where elected leaders tell their citizens to stay home while they sneak off to Florida for sun and fun, where they demand that your child wear a mask, but they go maskless. So you've heard the excuses. They were just holding their breath, but it's the American people who are waiting to exhale, waiting for the insanity to stop. We now live in a country where violent crime is out of control. Liberal prosecutors are letting criminals off easy, and many prominent Democrats still want to defund the police. You know, it seems like everything is backwards. The Biden administration requires vaccines for Americans who want to go to work or protect this country, but not for migrants who illegally cross the border. The Department of Justice treats parents like domestic terrorists, but looters and shoplifters roam free. The American people are left to feel like they're the enemy. This is not the same country it was a year ago. The president tried to paint a different picture tonight, but his actions over the last 12 months don't match the rhetoric. It's not what he promised when he took office. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is an alternative. Across the nation, Republican governors and legislators are showing Americans what conservative leadership looks like, what it means to respect the people we serve, to hear them out, to stand up for them and walk alongside them. We know that our problems require bold action, but we also know that bold action doesn't have to mean government action. It's Americans making their own decisions for their own families and future. Republican governors face the same COVID-19 virus head-on. But we honored your freedoms and saw right away that lockdowns and school closures, they came with their own significant cost, that mandates weren't the answer. And we actually listened to the science, especially with kids in masks and kids in schools. What happened and is still happening to our children over the last 2 years is unconscionable. Learning loss, isolation, anxiety, depression. In so many states, our kids have been left behind, and so many will never catch up. That's why Iowa was the first state in the nation to require that schools open their doors. I was attacked by the left, I was attacked by the media, but it wasn't a hard choice. It was the right choice. And keeping schools open is only the start of the pro-parent, pro-family revolution that Republicans are leading in Iowa and states across this country. Republicans believe that parents matter. It was true before the pandemic, and it has never been more important to say out loud. Parents matter. They have a right to know and to have a say in what their kids are being taught. Families also have every right to live in a safe and a secure community. And that begins with a safe and secure country. But the Biden administration has refused to secure our border. They've refused to provide the resources to stop human trafficking, to stop the staggering influx of deadly drugs coming into our neighborhoods. They've refused to protect you. With Texas and Arizona leading the way, I, along with Republican governors from several states, have sent resources to the border. And we've actually gone to the border, something that our president and vice president have yet to do since taking office. On the economy, the contrast couldn't be more stark. While Democrats in D.C. are spending trillions, sending inflation soaring, Republican leaders around the country are balancing budgets and cutting taxes, because we know that money spent on Main Street is better than money spent on bureaucracy. Today, I signed legislation that eliminates Iowa's tax on retirement income and sets our tax rate at 3.9%. That's less than half of what it was just 4 years ago. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that out of the top 20 states with the lowest unemployment rates, 17 have Republican governors. Republicans may not have the White House, but we're doing what we can to fill the leadership vacuum. And on the issues that are affecting Americans, Republicans are leading. We're standing up for parents and kids. We're standing up for life. We're keeping our communities safe and thanking those in uniform. We're fighting to restore America's energy independence, and that includes biofuels. We're getting people back to work, not paying them to stay home. Most of all, we're respecting your freedom. Behind me stands Iowa's Capitol, where we display our state motto: our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. And those aren't just empty words. It's a belief that the greatness of this state and this country lies in our people, not government. You shouldn't have to wake up every morning and worry about the next thing the government is going to do to you, your business, or your children. If we as elected leaders are doing our job, then the government is working well, but operating in the background. It's supporting the ingenuity and spirit of our people, not drowning them out. It's keeping them safe, not restricting their freedom. That's what I believe, that's what Republicans believe, and that's what Republicans are doing. I am so blessed to be the governor of Iowa, where people are humble, hardworking, and patriotic. We take care of each other. And yes, we are, as they say, Iowa nice. But you don't have to be from Iowa to see that those are the values of America at its best. All of America. Over the last few years, I've put my faith in Iowans, and they haven't let me down. I encourage this president to do the same, to put his faith in you, the American people, who have never wavered in your belief in this country, regardless of who leads it. Because you know, you've shown that the soul of America isn't about who lives in the White House. It's men and women like you in every corner of this nation who are willing to step up and take responsibility for your communities, for your neighbors, and ultimately for yourselves. By that most important measure at least, the state of our union is indeed strong. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Republican Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa honing in on what may be one of the key messages for Republicans in this midterms. In her words, parents matter, as she tried to keep schools open in what she called a pro-parent, pro-family revolution. All right, coming up, Gail speaks with 4 voters on what they thought of the president's speech. We'll have that live next. You're watching CBS News coverage of the State of the Union.
We want to bring back a group of voters that we spoke with prior to the president's speech and get their take on what they heard tonight. We talked to 67-year-old Democrat Irma Cooper, 40-year-old Libertarian Seth Duplantis, 72-year-old Democrat Rosemary Rocco, and 23-year-old Independent Mateo Gomez. Also want you to know they're at our affiliate stations around the country, KCBS in New York, WFOR in Miami, WCCO, which wins tonight with the best background, fireplace and everything, and KTVT TV in Minneapolis. Irma, I want to start with you. You're a 30-year veteran. You served in Iraq, and you told us earlier you wanted the president to make America's position clear when it comes to the war in Ukraine. Were you satisfied with what he had to say tonight?
Yes, I was. I thought he was very clear about not sending troops into Ukraine, but he was very adamant about supporting Ukraine and supporting NATO and protecting all of our NATO allies. And the fact that he was sending in financial support, weapons, the sanctions that he put on Russia to really stop them, from doing what they were doing to decrease their economy. So I thought that was great. He was very clear about it, so there was no misunderstanding. I was very pleased that what was said in his speech tonight and the unity.
All right. Thanks, Irma. Mateo, I want to go to you because you were one of the ones who said to me, I hope it's not about politics. You know how this goes. The Democrats will stand up. The Republicans will sit down. There was actually a lot of bipartisan applause tonight. Did that surprise you, and how did you feel about that?
There was also not a lot of people in the room. For example, Senator Marco Rubio was not there. But I did not feel hopeful, Senator. To be honest with you. I did not feel hopeful.
How
and
come?
It hurt a little bit because today, for example, earlier today, I was talking to university students and professors and political science students and professors, and guess what they said? That 0%, and they were not willing to watch the State of the Union address. And that's political science students. So imagine, the biology students would not, the chemistry students would not, the social workers probably might not either. So it hurts. I was not hopeful.
You also were hoping that he would address student loans. He did not do that tonight.
He did not talk about student loans, and I did not feel connected with the president to the extent of actually with the message he gave me. We could all Google it, Mateo Gomez, Joe Biden on anywhere, and then you see that we spoke in 2020, and he said that we're the best educated, the most open, and I did not feel that message being delivered today.
Okay, Mateo. Rosemary, you expressed some concern about COVID. You're still concerned. You're a contract tracer for a college. The president spoke tonight about returning back to more normal routines, he called it. How did you feel about that?
I thought he did a great job with it and outlined exactly what we need to do in terms of that we're not through it yet, but that we have the tools, if we use the tools, to get it under control, and that he's not going to be satisfied to live with it. I also, I felt very hopeful, and I was glad he did real talk, not happy talk. I was glad to hear him say a couple of times, hell of a thing.
Yeah, he did become quite conversational a couple of times. A couple of times he said, "I mean it, I mean it." Seth, you're a business owner in Dallas. The main thing you told us you were very concerned about was the supply chain issues and inflation. The president addressed that tonight. Was that enough for you?
You know, I think the president fell a little bit short in the sense that he was long on promises, but short on details. One of my big takeaways was that he wanted to lower costs by lowering costs and improving unemployment by employing people. And I don't think these things are going to happen overnight. I think ultimately folks are going to be disappointed with additional bureaucracy entering into the supply chain. He talked a little bit about government setting prices, and we know just in the free market system that makes this country so great that that's just ineffective.
All right, guys, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching with us. Thank you for participating earlier tonight and then staying around to see the rest of the speech. We really appreciate it. That's the beauty of this country, you know. Everybody can see the same thing and have different opinions about what they saw tonight.
Yeah. I mean, as we sort of think about and look at what happened tonight in the president's speech, it was a different kind of Joe Biden. I think he really was trying to turn the page with this unity agenda and at the same time rally people just like he's rallied the world against Vladimir Putin.
Right. I mean, he's had a very difficult few months trying to get his Build Back Better agenda across the finish line, and the recognition that when you've got 50 senators in the Senate, everything has to work out perfectly for you to be able to pass a partisan piece of legislation. So this is the White House sort of turning the page and saying, maybe we'll take a different tack for a while. Maybe we'll try to bring the two parties together.
Margaret, what's happened in the last
agenda?
Yeah.
Let's just start with even using the phrase unity agenda. I think that's encouraging.
What does that mean for breakfast?
What, unity agenda?
Yeah.
Well, I like the word unity. To me, it means that we are going to try to do this together. We are going to try to unite ourselves. We're going to have a plan to do that. And that makes sense to me, the way that he laid it out. You didn't think so?
Well, I just think when polls show that people blame President Biden for inflation and they don't think he's doing anything, and they say, what's your plan? Unity agenda doesn't get you there, or does it contradict anything that the governor was talking about in terms of the issues that Republicans are going to stay on that we know played a big role in these
But to be frank, the two big issues really confronting the president right now are the war in Ukraine and getting his choice confirmed to the Supreme Court.
Practically speaking, yes. One of the themes I thought was also restoring control. So much of this pandemic is about loss of personal control. The masks, they symbolize that to people, right? Just even symbolize broadcasting to the world that the capital of the United States can be back, masks off. The education theme you heard the governor of Iowa bring up, parents matter. That's also about restoring control in that sense.
And the White House is going to be announcing, we learned during the speech, a brand new COVID plan tomorrow, an acknowledgement that, you know, we're moving into a new phase of this pandemic.
Nancy Cordes bringing the news tonight. All right.
I'm still going to hang on to unity agenda.
I don't want to crush your dreams.
I don't crush my dreams tonight.
Our coverage of the State of the Union will continue on our CBS News streaming and on your late local news on this CBS station. Welcome back to CBS News and our coverage of President Biden's State of the Union address. Tonight, CBS News surveyed a national sample of speech watchers to get their instant reaction. And CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto joins us with all the results. Good evening, Anthony.
Hey, Nora, great to talk to you. You know, the top thing people wanted to hear coming into this speech was how the U.S. was going to deal with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what speech watchers told us was 7 in 10 felt that what Biden laid out would deal with Russia effectively. So big numbers there. But the other thing was that people were concerned that the U.S. would get dragged into a war with Europe. They don't want troops to go in. And in fact, 2/3 said, based on what they heard Joe Biden say tonight, they felt confident the U.S. would stay out of a war there. And that all led, Nora, to big numbers overall for approval. 78% said they approved of the speech that Biden gave overall. And there was another test for him tonight that we were all watching, and that was inflation. Coming into this, a lot of people felt, majorities felt, that he wasn't focused enough on it. And he moved the needle with these speech watchers, and I'll show you how. Before the speech, less than half felt that his policies could help to lower inflation. But after the speech, those same folks, almost 2/3, were more confident that his policies could, in fact, lower inflation. I will add this, though, Nora. To some degree, he was preaching to the converted, because there were a lot of Democrats who tuned into this speech and fewer Republicans who did. And that's typical for a president. Their own party often tunes in more, but we do have to add that because it's a lot of Democrats, and he's still got to then go out and sell this to more independents and more Republicans. Norah?
It's really interesting, Anthony Salvanto. Thank you. We also heard President Joe Biden, as well as Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, make several claims in their respective addresses. So CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett has been checking all the facts. Good evening, Major.
Good evening, Nora. Welcome to the fine print segment of our State of the Union coverage. We have two fact checks of President Biden, one of Republican Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa. I'll take President Biden's fact checks first. As you and the panel, Nora, made due note of, President Biden very rarely referred to the former president's administration, that is to say President Trump. And the one time that he did, he talked about the Trump tax cut, saying the $2 trillion tax cut passed during that administration benefited the top 1%. He made a reference by contrast to the American Rescue Plan, saying that that primarily benefited those in the working class, leaving no one behind. We rate that assertion by President Biden misleading, and here's why. It's not just that the top 1% benefited, they did. But according to the Brookings Institution, 80% of Americans got a tax cut, averaging about $2,100 in the year 2018. So that we rate as misleading. President Biden also said that the Justice Department, and this was under the criminal justice reform section of the speech, has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants. Well, on the first and third, body cameras and restricted no-knock warrants, that's true. But we rate this partially true because on banning chokeholds, there are exceptions. Federal law enforcement under the Justice Department can use chokeholds if there's a reasonable fear of bodily harm or death. And it doesn't apply across the board in the federal government. Department of Homeland Security is exempted, and of course state and local law enforcement exempted as well. That's why we rate this partially true. Now, Iowa's Republican Governor Kim Reynolds said, and I quote, "The Biden administration refused to secure the border." We rate that misleading, and here's why. There were 2 million migrant encounters in 2021 at the southern border. And an encounter means either the migrant was expelled or taken into custody. That's 4 times the amount during the last year of the Trump administration. Now, Republicans would say because that's a border crisis and the Biden administration policies are too lax at the border. But you can't argue that there's been no security at the border because these numbers clearly indicate people are being stopped, either expelled or taken into custody. So, again, we rate that misleading. Nora, back to you.
Major Garrett with the fine print, and that is hard, that fact-checking. Fabulous job. Thank you, especially in such a short time. Thank you. Want to bring back in our chief political analyst, John Dickerson, Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent, Margaret Brennan, chief White House correspondent, Nancy Cordes. And we said goodnight to Gail so she can get some few hours rest before CBS Mornings and interview the vice president. And so we're joined by Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Welcome to all. Let's start at the top. The president's speech tonight, Nancy, you were there at the White House. You'd spoken to advisors. How did the president deliver on what had been promised that he would try and do tonight?
Well, they said he was going to start with a message of unity and end with a message of unity. And I think we can all agree that's what he did. He started off talking about Ukraine, talked about the West being unified against Vladimir Putin, talked about the fight between democracy and autocracy, talked about what the U.S. was doing for Ukraine. And of course, in one of the most moving moments of the speech, he mentioned that the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. was up with the First Lady. She stood, they embraced, she had tears in her eyes, and everyone was applauding, wearing that blue and yellow, the colors of Ukraine's flag. And then, of course, at the end, again, a message of unity, talking about a variety of issues that all Americans, or at least a big majority, can rally around. Things like addressing the opioid epidemic or doing more to combat the explosion in mental health issues around the country, particularly for young people in the wake of this pandemic, helping veterans, finding a cure for cancer. These are the types of things that he knew would get a lot of applause on both sides of the aisle and allow him to pick up the mantle of bipartisanship and end the speech on a high note.
And while there were multiple examples of bipartisan applause, standing ovations, perhaps more than we've seen in a very long time at the State of the Union, a lot of that was around Ukraine and promising that Putin will pay a price. But this is only going to get uglier for the President of the United States and for the people of Ukraine. Members of Congress briefed that this war could go on 10, 20 years. This could end up being an albatross for the President Biden and his presidency dealing with this.
It absolutely could be. And we are watching live broadcast on television a human rights catastrophe. So for the president who has said he's putting human rights back at the center of the agenda, he's also drawn a very bright line to say we won't use military force to defend it. We will if you go a little bit farther west and touch our NATO allies. But the criticism has been such a bright line can actually encourage Vladimir Putin to know the limits that he can play up to, and he has done that. One of the things I also think is interesting is, and it gets to a point you've made, John, here, which is you don't get to pick the things you want to focus on. China, only mentioned twice in the speech. This is the thing. They wanted to park Russia over here and move to what the president described tonight as the chief economic challenge of the 21st century, and that is China, not just from a foreign policy angle, economically. And that is something it also gets bipartisan support, and it is rare in Washington to find something like that. So I thought it was interesting the president.
I mean, I remember when I covered President Obama, and he wanted to do the same thing, too, which was actually shift away from the Middle East and talk about China. Right. And that was unsuccessful for them. I mean, as much as they tried.
It is. But to your point on Russia and the disruption to the economy, the president's top White House economic advisor has said the duration of this conflict will be one of the main decision points in the direction of this economy. I mean, the average person will spend cost them about $750 more a year in energy just if oil stays at this elevated level above $100 a barrel. And that's just energy.
And it's so hard when you're a president and you're on the watch and you have so much control over foreign policy to then go out in the country, as Joe Biden says he wants to do, to talk about his agenda for lowering costs and letting wages rise and all the things he wants to do on the domestic front. Very much harder to do when you are monitoring an issue like this that can change so quickly and when then there can be so many ricocheting consequences, either in terms of warfare or in terms of all these economic blowbacks.
What's interesting to me is that the president is obviously pretty comfortable on this foreign policy terrain. He's the former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But as we all know, domestic politics really carry the day in terms of shepherding your political base and making sure that your political constituencies are strong and with you. How much, how durable is the president effectively administrating foreign policy on Ukraine? How much does that get him domestically? I noticed in some of our polling that was put out earlier that people actually agree with the general approach that the White House is taking, but they're not happy with the president's handling. That gap, by the way, mimics what we see in domestic policies with the president when you look at do you like the Build Back Better agenda, but do you agree with how the president is addressing the economy? It's so interesting to me.
That strange disconnect, because here you have record job growth, et cetera, and yet the president getting no credit for that. I want to bring in Congressman Hurd, who's been listening to this conversation as well. Congressman?
Sure. Look, President Biden did what he needed to do on Ukraine and let the rest of the world know that Republicans and Democrats are supportive of doing something and trying to help Ukraine, but also supporting NATO. But as Governor Reynolds showed, a lot of what she talked about is what has happened, and what President Biden was talking about is what he wants to do. And when voters go to the poll in 2022, they're going to ask, are their lives better off today at that time when they vote than when the president came in office and his party is going to be impacted? The likelihood that Democrats lose the House is incredibly high, and potentially the Senate. And as the two voters that Gail interviewed earlier, I think it was Mateo and Seth, they weren't convinced by this speech alone. And so the reality is the American people want to know, how are you going to impact my ability to put food on the table, a roof over my head, and how am I going to be able to take care of the people that I love? And Governor Reynolds laid it out perfectly. You empower people, not empower the government. And that's going to be some of the message when it comes to voters over these next few months.
What about her message where she said parents matter?
Look, it absolutely is about parents matter. We saw that in Virginia. Governor Reynolds also laid out the number of kids that were away from learning, from being around other people, the impact that had on their growth. And so ultimately parents want to be able to have the ability to do what's best for their kids and make sure they're putting kids in the schools that they want to be put in and take care of the way they should be taken care of. And so this is going to be a big issue. I actually think education is something that the Republican Party should be doing more. We look here in Texas when it comes to school choice, the achievement gap between Black and brown communities and their white counterparts has been taken away partly because of the ability to get access to different kinds of schools. And we have income inequality because we have education inequality. And if we make sure we're teaching our kids to be prepared for jobs that don't exist today and that they're going to be able to move up the economic ladder, that's going to solve many of the issues that we're seeing in our communities.
Well, Congressman Hurd, I know it was Election Day there in Texas. I was chatting with all my Texas friends, and I'm glad to see you from my home city of San Antonio. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Always a pleasure to be on with you.
Take care. All right, ahead, former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster joins us to break down what President Biden said about Russia and Ukraine. And welcome back to our coverage of the President's State of the Union address. We go now to former National Security Advisor and retired General H.R. McMaster. General McMaster has nearly 4 decades of national security experience. General, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Nora.
It was remarkable to see the president spend a big chunk of the opening of his speech talking about Vladimir Putin, promising that he will pay the price, getting bipartisan applause. But there's a difficult road ahead, as we've been talking about. Members of Congress being briefed that this is a war that could last 10 to 20 years. What do you see as the challenges ahead?
Well, the challenge is mainly to the Ukrainian people. And I think it was really encouraging today to see so many people dressed in blue and white and to see us celebrating the courage and the determination of the Ukrainian people to secure their freedom. And one of the themes that I think that carried through the speech, I would have liked to see it more explicitly, is, hey, how about take the opportunity to celebrate the freedoms that we enjoy, to cherish those freedoms, and to really learn from the example of the Ukrainians. I think the theme, to agree, I guess, with Gail's earlier comments, I do think that this unity agenda is important to the competition in Ukraine because, Putin assumed that there would be disunity, right? Disunity within our alliance and disunity in the United States that would make us irresolute in our response. And I think the president was strong in banning Russian carriers as just another measure and communicating our sustained support for the Ukrainian people.
We have been following that convoy, that Russian convoy that is just about 20 miles outside of Kyiv. Today, a senior defense official saying that convoy has made no appreciable movement in the last 24 hours. They believe they may be running out of food and fuel, that morale is low. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that the Russian forces are at a significant qualitative disadvantage. And Nora, in war, there's a power greater than numbers, and that has to do with the cohesion, the combat effectiveness of units that comes from believing not what's behind them, not fighting what's in front of them, but understand they're fighting for what's behind them, and to in a recognition that they're fighting in a just endeavor. And that they need confidence. I mean, in combat, of course, combat is the ultimate contest of wills, and soldiers struggle to reconcile their instinct for self-preservation with the achievement of some aim over which others are trying to kill them. And you want it to be a worthy aim. And I think these Russian soldiers are questioning that. And there are reports, Nora, that they're not well trained. They're not confident in their own ability and the ability of their teams to fight together. And I'll tell you, I've only seen snippets like you have. But I have not seen evidence of effective, what we would call combined arms and joint operations. I think they are really overextended. And the Ukrainians, of course, have demonstrated the will. I mean, when you look at this force, it looks massive, right? 17 miles on a road. But Nora, that's pretty small when you look at the task ahead of them to try to subjugate a people who number 40 million in a territory the size of Texas.
Yeah, that convoy now growing to 40 miles, we have been told. I also want to ask you about the charge made by Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. on Capitol Hill. She accused the Russians of using a vacuum bomb, a thermobaric bomb, what military experts say is the unthinkable. It's just short of a nuclear weapon, would be a war crime prohibited by the Geneva Conventions. If true, does this suggest that Putin may be taking this to a new level because he's frustrated at the lack of advance of his ground troops?
Well, ethics in war calls for discipline and discrimination and proportionality. And this goes back to the law of war as laid out by St. Thomas Aquinas. And the Russians have shown really a penchant for violating that across many years. Remember, just not the poisoning of individuals, but we have to remember that it's been Putin who has enabled the serial episodes of mass homicide in the Syrian civil war using some of the most heinous weapons on earth, nerve gas and other chemical weapons. So this is an unscrupulous leader of forces who have fought unscrupulously. And I think that we have to be prepared to respond to the worst. And the Ukrainians, of course, are bearing the brunt of this and deserve all the support we can give them, not only economically, but obviously helping them to sustain their defensive effort against the completely unprovoked assault on them and their freedom and their lives.
Is there an off-ramp for Putin? Does he even want one?
Well, I think he probably doesn't know what to do right now, Nora. I think that this is a great example of an authoritarian leader who believed what people were telling him. Hey, that's a great idea, I think is what he heard around the table, because he's cultivated an environment in which people fear probably the consequences of giving him candid advice. How about that kind of just bizarre scene, right, when he was meeting with his cabinet and browbeating the head of his intelligence to agree with him on this invasion, or the looks on the faces of his senior military officers when he was getting an update across that long table that's, I guess, is meant to communicate that he's omnipotent. So, but he's not omnipotent. And what this has shown, I think, is that he assumed, that the Ukrainian people were really, as he, in his effort to manipulate history, not a viable nation. Of course, they're a viable nation. He thought he didn't take this guy Zelensky, the president. He thought, okay, this guy's a comedian, like he's a ballroom dancer, right? I mean, how's he going to stand up to me, the judo wrestler who rides bareback on horses, right? Well, I mean, I think he believed his own propaganda, Nora, and I think he's probably in shock in large measure, trying to figure out what to do next, because he really doesn't have any good options.
That former KGB agent clearly didn't watch that version of Dancing with the Stars, because the moves that President Zelensky had were quite impressive. I dare say so myself. Nancy Cordes and John Dickerson have a quick question for you as well.
I want to ask you, HR, about some level setting that the White House appears to be trying to accomplish right now. Yes, out in public, everyone from the president on down is saying that the Ukrainians are behaving in an absolutely heroic fashion, which they are. But behind the scenes, they're really trying to temper expectations, and they're still predicting that the Russians could very well succeed here after a weeks-long siege. Do you believe that that's possible? And why would the White House be so concerned about people kind of letting their hopes and expectations run away with them, that perhaps the Ukrainians could pull off this David versus Goliath victory?
Well, I think they could pull it off. And the only thing that I think that could prevent that from happening is just devastating brutality on the part of the Russians. Remember, the Russians had a pretty ineffective initial assault into Chechnya. And what was the response? They leveled Grozny. I mean, I think we have to really keep a close eye on Kharkiv. I think that could become a Grozny. But of course, what that won't do is extinguish the will of the Ukrainian people. And as I mentioned, the force is just not sufficient to establish control. Of course, there's the old saying that everybody knows, right? It's like the Geico commercial. Everybody knows that war's an extension of politics. What that means is you have to consolidate gains to get the sustainable political outcome that you desire. And what Putin wants is to extend Russian influence over the former territories of the Soviet Union and to install a puppet regime in Ukraine. I don't think that could happen without sustained resistance from the Ukrainian people. I think he thought of Ukraine as an authoritarian regime like his, right? You decapitate it and then I guess maybe a new order will just emerge. He's actually waging a war against all of the Ukrainian people, and I think it's unmanageable, especially for the size of force that he's amassed, which is not that big. It sounds big, 160,000, but it's not that big for the task at hand.
HR, it's John Dickerson. Now, just on that very point, you are very familiar with insurgencies. What does it mean if Russia wants to try to hold Ukraine? If given what you've seen in the spirit of the Ukraine people, what's that going to mean day to day in terms of what Putin now sees he would have to commit to hold on to this territory?
Well, he would need Ukrainian partners to do that. I mean, ultimately, to succeed in insurgency, you have to separate the insurgents from the population, and convince the population ultimately that they can advance their interests through some sort of a political process rather than through violence. And I don't think the Ukrainian people are going to accept a regime imposed by Russia, just like they didn't accept it in 2004. And that's why they were revolted in the Maidan or the Orange Revolution. And so I think that Putin has engaged in a mission that he just can't succeed in it. Now, of course, those who will pay the price for this are the Ukrainian people, and that's why they deserve our support, John. John, you know what? I want to agree with you too, though, as well. In your previous comment, I would like to see more about, okay, what are we going to do to address really the dependence issues on Russian hydrocarbons that initially made our response to this tepid and still has not allowed us to with our allies, sanction 59%, of Russia's exports. And what are the lessons for that for U.S. energy policy? The president talked quite a bit about trying to reduce prices. Well, hey, let's not cause the rise in prices by canceling a Canadian pipeline and greenlighting a Russian one. I mean, that made no sense. And we were still importing Russian oil, John, into Massachusetts because of the pipelines we've canceled. We should be exporting LNG as a bridge into renewable energy. And how do you give a talk on energy security and climate and not even mention the word nuclear? So I think what we saw in the speech here is maybe a missed opportunity to make a connection between national security and energy security.
That's a brilliant point, because one of the threads that the president could have said is that this will probably accelerate Europe's move towards renewable energy. And by the way, in that $550 billion of climate change stuff that he wanted in Build Back Better, there was a lot of money for renewables in there that didn't get passed, that Joe Manchin blocked. Yeah.
HR mentions when Jimmy Carter in 1980. When Jimmy Carter spoke his State of the Union in 1980, to your point, he talked about the Soviets going into Afghanistan and how that created a need for an energy program because of the oil that was at stake in Afghanistan. So he did what you're talking about.
I think that's a really important parallel, because it was in that period that it was our dependence on Middle Eastern oil that had created a security problem. Now, if we leap right to renewables without a plan, without nuclear power being part of it, without LNG as a bridge, if we all have electric vehicles, but we charge them from coal-fired plants, that's an even bigger problem. I mean, coal-fired plants, burn a ton of coal, every minute. And so, and what Germany's doing, what Japan's doing, is increasing their coal generation. The U.S. is exporting more coal this year. So, Germany is actually shutting down steel and aluminum plants to sell their energy allocation because it's more cost effective than to generate steel and aluminum. So let's not replicate what Germany did. And let's come up with a comprehensive energy program that puts security up front. And, we're going to trade dependence in the 70s for Middle Eastern oil to dependence on China for renewables and the rare earths and the batteries and the magnets that are associated with it, unless we put together a comprehensive plan to integrate energy security with national security.
You should do a whole show, Margaret, on energy, because he's right. The general's right, and there's so many smart people in America and big companies that are trying to make these kinds of changes and really catapult us into the future and make sure that we're not dependent on China and other places, so that we can really.
Well, that was something actually earlier I thought was interesting, that the president. He did positively reference a few companies, but largely criticized corporate America. And he needs corporate America to be bought in on a lot of these programs. But for HR, General McMaster, I should say, excuse me, you mentioned what Vladimir Putin might be willing to do. Given what he did in Chechnya, given that there were reports in 2015 that he did use vacuum bombs in Syria, given that he backed a war criminal, as you just said, who used chemical and biological weapons, I wonder what you think the next policy choice is for President Biden when that happens, if that happens in Ukraine. Will the United States acknowledge it did and then have to do something about it?
Well, Margaret, of course, every situation like that, you have to give the president multiple options. But I think there have to be military options associated with that from a humanitarian perspective, right? Maybe that's when you do declare a safe zone, just to be able to evacuate civilians and somehow mitigate the humanitarian crisis. And then, of course, there has to be, I think, retaliation economically, even beyond what we've done so far. And I think the hydrocarbon sector is the third rail because the real practical difficulties associated with Germany and other countries giving Russia coercive power over their economies. So I think it would have to be an integrated solution to this, but there would have to be, in this case, I think, a military component, at least from a humanitarian perspective.
General H.R. McMaster, always wonderful to have you for this fulsome discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norah. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you. Thank you. Let's bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe, who now is also an expert on renewables. What say you, Ed?
Tell you, after all that, absolutely. What we can tell you from here is the president is back and has we've gotten the lid, which means that the day is done. The staff is still here cleaning up and answering follow-up questions. He heads tomorrow to Wisconsin. You're going to see a lot of travel this year by the president to just a handful of states. Swing states in the midterm elections that also happen to be swing states, most likely in the 2024 presidential election. He'll go to Wisconsin with the First Lady to discuss the infrastructure bill that was passed last year and the domestic agenda he laid out tonight. Don't be surprised if you hear a little more talk about the unity agenda, those 4 ideas that he discussed near the end of his speech, even if they may not have much of a prayer here in Washington. Beyond that, of course, we anticipate he will continue to be monitoring the situation in Ukraine, and notably tomorrow also, perhaps to a point we were discussing earlier in the evening, a critical launch of the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation battle as she heads to Capitol Hill for her inaugural in-person meetings with senior senators. She'll start with the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, visit with the leaders of the Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin and Chuck Grassley, likely also meet with Mitch McConnell in person tomorrow, and then go from there. Remember, Democrats are pushing to get her confirmed by mid-April, the Easter recess. And so if these first few days go well, they're hoping that this is a pretty smooth confirmation process and speedy, like it was for Amy Coney Barrett there near the end of the Trump administration. But tonight here at the White House, they are, for the most part, thrilled by what they have seen in terms of reaction. They were pleased by all that bipartisan applause, and they're already retweeting the results of our CBS News instant poll. For those especially who watch us on streaming and spend time on Twitter, you know Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff, is a big tweeter. He has captured some of our polling graphics and sent them out as proof that people who watched the speech tonight were relatively pleased by what they saw and heard.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, thank you so much. Let's turn now to Capitol Hill and Nicole Killian. 2 questions for you. 1, tell us what's happening, of course, with the president's Supreme Court nominee. And 2nd, what's the chance for any bipartisanship or any of the things that the president talked about getting through Congress before the midterms?
Well, as you heard Ed mention there, Judge Jackson will be meeting with congressional leaders, including Leaders Schumer and McConnell, as well as the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin, as well as Senator Grassley. One important thing to notice, while these meetings are the next big phase of the process, we do expect an announcement on that next phase, which is when these confirmation hearings will start. And Senator Durbin, again, who heads the Judiciary Committee, has said that he will make that announcement at some point this week. So that is something we will be watching. Still unclear if Judge Jackson will get bipartisan support, but certainly that is the hope of the White House and of Democrats. As far as broadly speaking, in terms of will we see more bipartisanship on Capitol Hill, the answer is always that it remains to be seen. Certainly some of the things the president proposed tonight on mental health and other issues are potentially tangible deliverables, maybe that Republicans and Democrats can compromise on, but on some of these bigger policy agendas, like the economy, like inflation, there is still a pretty clear divide. We've already seen a lot of reaction from Republicans, including the House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who in essence said that the president tonight was out of touch. Nora.
Nicole Killian, thank you. Let's also bring in our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa. He's also up on Capitol Hill. And Bob, quite a scene inside the chamber. Outbursts by two Republican House members, also Democratic Senator Joe Manchin sitting with the Republicans. What are you hearing tonight?
Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia remains a critical part of President Biden's agenda. It was just a year ago, in March of 2021, that he provided that crucial vote to get that $1.9 trillion rescue plan passed. So his view on tonight's speech, it's an important one. And our colleague, Alan He, up here on Capitol Hill, caught Senator Manchin in the hallway. And Senator Manchin wasn't carrying a bucket of cold water out of the House of Representatives, but he might as well have been carrying a bucket of cold water based on these comments, Nora. He said, according to Allen, asked about the pieces of BBB the president brought up, he answered, quote, "Not until you get your financial house in order can you do that." He added, "I've never found that you could lower costs by spending more." And Senator Romney, who was standing next to him at the time, chimed in and said, quote, "You can't say it better than that." So not a full-throated endorsement in any way by Senator Manchin for moving in a rapid way to pass President Biden's remaining agenda items.
Wow, hitting a wall there. Robert Costa and Alan He, thank you for that reporting. Well, there you have it. I mean, Nancy used to cover the Hill, too. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody that frustrates Joe Biden up on Capitol Hill more than Joe Manchin.
That's right, because even though Kyrsten Sinema has also blocked a lot of his agenda, the general assumption is that she's not going to stand there on her own, that if Manchin were to flip and go along with Democrats, she too would go along. So Manchin really is the pivotal holdout here. And, you know, frankly, he's been difficult to pin down. There was a time when he was promising to go along with Build Back Better if he got the infrastructure bill passed. Then he reneged. He said he just couldn't live with the price tag. And now it's not clear what, if anything, he would go along with.
What I wonder from Joel is, since you've worked in Democratic politics, is, okay, the base isn't everything, but the base is something. And what do they get out of this speech?
Well, the thing you have to define with Joe Biden is, what is the base?
Yeah.
Is the base the people in the suburbs, independents, or is it black voters, progressives, college-educated voters, right? People who care about student loans and voting rights. What's Joe Biden's base? And I think that's always been the challenge here, is that the president maybe misread his base in 2021. I think tonight was probably a course correction to try to get back to those independents that got him the White House by some people's telling. But then you ask other folks in the Democratic coalition, and they would say it was black voters and it was people in the suburbs. Like, it really is a Rorschach test in terms of who do you think put Joe Biden in the White House? And I think if you answer that question, you'll answer how the president kind of gets back to his head above water.
Yeah, well, he tried to deliver to the progressives in his party. He tried to deliver to Bernie Sanders. He tried to deliver to the progressive wing in the House side with those big numbers. He was able to shore them down a bit, but at the end of the day, he couldn't bring it across the finish line.
I'll just tell you, though, he omitted things that were really important to those progressives, like spending 4 lines on voting rights tonight. Even the point I made earlier about January 6th, and I take everybody's point. You're right, this was a night for unity, but that's a very important, that democracy agenda. You want to talk about democracy in Russia, but you got to talk about it here in the United States as well. All
right, well, thanks to this great panel. Enjoyed watching the President's State of the Union, the Republican response with all of you, and your very smart comments. Thank you. You've been watching CBS News coverage of President Biden's State of the Union address. I want to thank all of our correspondents, contributors, and guests. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington. See you later.